I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, major American Jewish organizations. And we turn to the story of Neil Simon's very famous play, The Odd Couple. You'll all recall Felix Unger and Oscar Madison. For reasons that require great backstory, they come together in an apartment on the Upper West Side. That odd couple, however, is a made marriage compared to the odd couple we're now about to address. We welcome Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy to explain the oddest couple in the Middle East. That would be Iran and Turkey. Jonathan, a very good evening to you. All right, I'm ready for this backstory. How do these two major powers, both with ambitions to dominate the same region, that's the neo-Ottomanists of Ankara and Istanbul, and the Twelvers of Iran, how do they get along? How do they find that they can live together? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Well, Turkey and Iran are the best of frenemies. They are at odds with one another because, of course, they are on the other. They are opposing each other along that sectarian divide. Turkey is, of course, Sunni and Iran is Shia. And Turkey has been involved in the anti-Houthi coalition and has been working with the Saudis on the one hand. But on the other, we have seen that the Turks have been involved in a massive illicit finance scheme that has benefited the Iranians. They were involved in $100 billion worth of illicit transactions, according to a leaked Istanbul prosecutor's report. And they were also involved in something known as the Gas for Gold scheme that allowed Iran to patriate some $20 billion at the height of the sanctions regime. And so the Iranians and the Turks, who are neighbors, they understand that while they oppose each other along sectarian lines, have a lot to gain financially from one another, and they cannot quite be at war either. And so even when they disagree about Assad in Syria or about Iran's ambitions in the region, they can't quite go to war.
What is the interest of Iran in supporting the PKK when they have their own Kurdish problem?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Iranians have always had minor Kurdish problems, but that is not really what they're thinking about right now. The Iranians are thinking about their regional ambitions. They're thinking about Assad in Syria. They're thinking about Hezbollah. They're thinking about Hamas. They're thinking about taking over Iraq. The Kurds do not get in their way, not nearly the way the Kurds encumber the Turks. And so when Iran thinks about its order of battle, it realizes that it can work with the PKK to a certain extent. I don't think this is a long-term marriage, but I do believe that they are willing to make short-term arrangements with any Kurdish party, for that matter, as long as it helps them advance regionally. And of course, the Turks see this very differently. The Turks see Kurdish nationalism as a direct threat to their ambitions in the region, and that puts the Turks and the Iranians at odds.
And does that play out because the Kurds have done a good job against IS, which Iran considers an enemy as well, that it serves their purposes to have this kind of tension going for their regional designs?
Well, I mean, look, absolutely. I mean, but first and foremost, you have to understand that when the Kurdish factions are fighting ISIS, and ISIS is the most dangerous threat to the survival of the Assad regime, there is no question that the Iranians are going to get behind those Kurds, and they're going to give them whatever they need. And they're certainly not going to work with the Turks to destroy them, despite whatever delicate regional issues are at play. And so that is undoubtedly one of the challenges right now that is in the way of rapprochement between Iran and Turkey.
Right now, Turkey's position with regard to the Syrian civil war, it's burdened by the refugees. It has a brittle border that it has to guard. Does it want Assad to go? Is that part of the conversation with Tehran, to replace Assad with some other figure to restore stability to the border?
This was always the case, that Turkey wanted to see a new regime. From the very early goings of the Syrian civil war, Turkey wanted to see Assad go. And the primary reason for that was that it sought to replace Assad with a Muslim Brotherhood-leaning regime, not unlike what it sought in Egypt, in Tunisia, and other places around the Middle East. Of course, Turkey has lost that battle in many of those fronts. I think it's still clinging unrealistically to the idea that they might be able to supplant Assad. But that's certainly why the Turks have been in support of ISIS, of the Nusra Front, of Ahrar al-Sham, of a number of the jihadi groups that have been streaming across their very porous border, and the Turks have made that border porous by design. And the problem that we're seeing right now is that they have created this problem, and it's now beginning to blow back on them. ISIS is beginning to threaten them directly. There was a suicide bombing out in the eastern part of Turkey last month by an ISIS partisan. And these were things that the Turks never thought would happen. But this is what happens when you support a jihadist proxy.
How does the Iran deal, the P5+1 deal with Iran, impact these developments?
Well, I mean, we look at it from two perspectives. From the financial perspective, the Iranians are about to make the Turks very rich. That the sanctions relief they're about to receive, their ability to work through Turkey to send products on to Europe, for example, will enrich both sides exponentially. And so the Turks are, I think, salivating at the prospect of the JCPOA, at least from that angle. The problem is they're also aware of the fact that Iran is now going to become a stronger regional power. And what that does to Turkey militarily, politically, across the region, the Turks just don't know. And so there is some ambivalence now on the part of the Turks, and I think it's for that reason that the Turks have invited the United States to come and finally operate out of Incirlik against ISIS. They're looking to find stronger backers, because for a while there they were trying to strike out on their own. I think they were failing miserably, and now they're looking to get back under the umbrella of the United States.
If the Turks cut off their support, their tacit support of ISIS, at least in terms of resupply and the chain that runs from Europe through Turkey into Iraq and Syria, can ISIS survive under that siege?
ISIS can survive. I would say that probably 50% or more of the ISIS financial stream comes from conquest, from pillage and plunder, and that is really their primary source. Now, the rest of it comes from, let's say the weapons, the bulk cash smuggling, the oil sales, and the like. Now, it would hurt them significantly if Turkey cut that off, but I do think they would likely survive. The real question is whether Turkey can survive if they cut off that pipeline, because what you have right now are ISIS operatives who have been active inside Turkey for the last 3 to 4 years. This is infrastructure that can be used to attack Turkey. We saw it again last month with that suicide bombing, but there could be quite a lot more of that in the months to come now that Ankara has thrown in its lot with the United States.
What is the reason for the snapback election? Is there any reason to anticipate a different outcome in Turkey?
In Turkey,
and why Erdogan seems to be moving in that direction? I understand the developments of having a paralyzed situation, but would a snap election coming up in a few weeks really come out with it in November? That is a different outcome.
Well, it's a gamble, I think, on Erdogan's part. I mean, he lost in a free and fair election. Or let's say he lost support in a free and fair election the last time around. You have to remember that Erdogan has been trying to create a sort of Putin-style imperial presidency. He was prime minister for 8 years. Now he's trying to empower the office of the presidency for another 8 with him at the helm. It didn't go as well as he would have liked in the last round of elections, and he's thinking that perhaps he can do it again now with crisis looming, both with ISIS and with the PKK, perhaps galvanizing the ultra-nationalists within Turkey, the Islamists within Turkey. Maybe he thinks he's going to be able to get them to line up behind him. The risk, of course, is that more people join the Kurdish parties, more people go with the nationalist parties, and they leave the AKP behind. We don't know, but I do believe that Erdogan probably learned a lesson that he allowed for a free and fair election and lost the last time. With his ambitions, I would not be surprised to see a manipulation of the elections the next time around.
And again, about the Kurds and their ambitions. Are the Kurds at risk because Turkey's pushing back and Iran's pushing back, or are they secure in that northern part of Iraq, so secure that they don't need to concern themselves with Ankara?
Look, I think the Kurds of northern Iraq have the support of Ankara. that they've earned the trust of Ankara.
I see.
And that's where they are now. I think the real concern that I have now is looking at those Syrian fighting factions that have been so effective against ISIS. Those are the ones that Turkey would like to weaken significantly.
That's what's called the YPG?
That's right.
Right.
And the PYD. And those are the groups that are now, I think, in trouble, where the Turks have been targeting some of their territory, and the weaker they become, the stronger ISIS becomes, and Turkey's designs begin to play out in the region. And so this is what we're watching now. It's incredible how complex this has become now that Turkey is now fully engaged in a war against the Kurds. This is adding a new wrinkle to what was already a very, very complicated Middle East.
What supply does the YPG have? Where do they gain their weapons, their money, their sustenance?
Some from Iran, some from northern Iraq, some from eastern Turkey. But of course, with the Kurds, or with the Turks rather, going on the offensive, some of that may dry up.
Dr. Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy is Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. It's called the Muddle East. I'm John Batchelor. Later in